Gabriela, my name is Vinay Parameshwar, and I'm the assistant conductor of the Cleveland Orchestra, and I'm the music director of this youth orchestra. So we've not met in person, but it's so great to meet you on Zoom.
Likewise.
And I'm really grateful that you're here with us. So let me introduce you, and then we'll get started in our conversation. So hi everyone, good to see all of you. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I hope you're warm enough. It really dropped temperature-wise last night. But it is my pleasure to welcome our special guest, Gabriela Lena Frank. And she has had a distinguished career as a pianist and also one of the leading composers of our time. She's currently the composer in residence at the Philadelphia Orchestra, and she has received commissions from artists like Yo-Yo Ma, Don Upshaw, as well as some of the finest orchestras in the country, such as the Cleveland Orchestra, Boston Symphony, the Chicago Symphony. She's also been the composer in residence at the Detroit Symphony and the Houston Symphony. She's the winner of a Latin Grammy and a Grammy nominee as a composer and a pianist. And she's also the founder of the Gabriela Lena Frank Creative Academy of Music. And like me, she is a native of the San Francisco Bay Area, so she gets extra brownie points for that. So Gabriela, it's so wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much. And the group we have here is about 35 musicians of the Cleveland Orchestra Youth Orchestra. In this time, we have put together two smaller sized orchestras. This one here is with strings, percussion, harp, and keyboard, and then we have another all strings group. But we have 35 supremely talented high schoolers from Northeast Ohio who ordinarily come to Severance Hall every week to rehearse on the stage where the Cleveland Orchestra performs. They get coachings from Cleveland Orchestra musicians. Franz Welser-Most works with them regularly, and I work with them every week as well. So it's a really wonderful program. A lot of talent on this screen here. So it's really wonderful to have you. And I would love if you could start out by just talking about your musical upbringing, how you got into composition, and just kind of the beginnings of your life as a musician to where you are now.
Yeah, well, sure. I want to make sure that this is something that's really of service for all of you that are here with us this Saturday. So I'll talk about, how I got into music, and I'm still kind of amazed that I got to declare music major. I remember the first day as a freshman in college, it was still incredible to me that, oh my God, this is like a real thing. Like, you have people getting a degree in flute, not like poli-sci or econ or some of the other things I thought, I might study instead. And here I am, many decades later, and I'm still like, I can't believe I actually make money doing this. This is my job, and I love my job. So I think I would like to, talk a little bit about myself. But I also want to make sure it's not a lecture, that if you have questions, just put it in the chat, and maybe it could be moderated, and you just kind of say, hey, we have a question, and we can make this more of a conversation, a conversación, between all of us, so that this is something that I hope afterwards will give you some intel about the kind of choices that you might consider making for your own life, because this is a critical time, not just in history, but this history as the backdrop of your life. This is a critical time in your life as you figure out what you may wish to do for the rest of the years that you have on this planet. It begins now. And I made certain decisions when I was a teenager that I'm still living by. So childhood is quickly receding at this point, and that's a great thing. So I was born in 1972, and my parents, my dad is I like to say, a nice Jewish boy from the Bronx, and my mom was a young woman that he met when he joined the Peace Corps. And he joined the Peace Corps in the 60s when Kennedy started this program. And he was in the first or second wave. I get it confused, I never remember. But he was there when the program really started. And it was a program that nobody knew if it was going to be effective or not. But the whole purpose of the program during this really tumultuous time in history was to send the hope of America, the future of America, or the youth of America, out to other parts of the world that we were still calling the third world. And these parts of the world could be places that had dictatorships or sometimes didn't have dictatorship. They were open to Americans coming in, but needed help with the economy or sanitation or women's rights. And you didn't get to choose where you were stationed. I think that's still the policy now. So my father was stationed in this small and beautiful mountainous coastal jungle nation of Peru. And it was an interesting time in Peru's history. It was beginning to find some money in different trades. It had benefited from different mining booms, but it was wealth that was very, very irregularly distributed. So you had extremely poor areas, and then you had a lot of wealth. And most of the wealth was not concentrated in the hands of native people that are descended from the Incas. So my mom, she grew up in the coast in a small town called Chimbote. She was 17 and my dad was 21 when they met. They were so young, and they met at a Peace Corps volunteer party. My mom had a sister that was a secretary for the Peace Corps volunteer office, and she went. And I hear all these stories about that first meeting, and they've gotten so overblown over the years, but they had never seen anything like one another. And so it was like instant chemistry. They got together, and within about 3 months of knowing each other, they said, yeah, we can do this. Let's make it permanent. And that is kind of breathtaking, the fact that it came from such different worlds. So my mom, when she grew up, my mother is part Chinese and really looks it. You really see her Asian ancestry, and part Indian, as in, like I was saying, descended from the Incas, and part Spanish. And her first language was Cantonese, and her maiden name is actually Cantonese. So I take the maiden name when I travel Latin America. That's the custom of taking on all your different family names. And then her second language was Quechua, which was Indian, and then it was Spanish. And she was one of 15 children, so a really large quasi-Catholic family, because my grandparents, her parents, never married. And my grandfather was a speculator. So he comes from the Chinese side of the family. And I remember when I finally visited Chimbote, I was in my early 30s with my mom, and she was walking me around this town. It's a fishing village, basically. But the old hotel where she had her second date with my dad was still there, the Hotel Chimor. And the old movie theater that they used to own was still there and still operational. I was like, wow, look at this guy. And they lost a movie theater a year later because their fortunes ebbed and flowed. It was a really chaotic life. And there weren't a lot of opportunities for a woman like her to pursue her goals. And the artistic gene is very strong on my mom's side of the family. They're incredible. You see these people that can draw anything, like they can draw caricatures, and they just have that gift. It's kind of like just having perfect pitch. There's just something that they're born with. So several of her brothers and sisters and my mother have that. And she was always sketching and using chalk and making these things that look like the Mona Lisa on the sidewalk. But there are no opportunities for women in Peru in 40s or 50s to do anything like what you guys and I do, nothing like that. And so when she married my father, they landed in Berkeley in the 60s during the Vietnam War protests and the hippie movement and Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco. It was a really, 60s and early 70s were a really dynamic time in this part of the country's history. And she began to thrive. My father was a graduate student at UC Berkeley and became a Mark Twain scholar. I had my brother a couple years later. I have the little kid sister adoration of the big brother. I've always been in awe of him. And he was the first Latino to graduate from Stanford with a doctorate in neuroscience. So you can see that, probably like you guys, we were a bunch of overachievers and scholastically, motivated. And my brother and I got used to, even in the Bay Area, witnessing a certain kind of segregation that was happening in the school. So at Berkeley High School, he and I were routinely the only Latinos in the honors courses, the advanced placement courses. And at the time when I was a teenager, when I was a junior and senior, I was studying Russian. And I thought I was going to be a Russian studies major and go study political science. I was probably headed towards law school. And it was something that was on my radar because this was the late 80s. So this was the time of Gorbachev and Perestroika, Glasnost, and this was my political awakening to the world, with to see Tiananmen Square and the wall come down, and it was really amazing. Now, during this time, I was studying music, and I was facile as a pianist, and my piano teacher was a neighborhood teacher who was like mom number two from the time I was 5 until I went to college. And she was a refugee from South Africa, and she was a soft-spoken Afrikaner woman that gave me African music to play, and music from countries that don't exist anymore, like Yugoslavia, Ruthenia, Transylvania, alongside my diet of Bach and Clementi and all of these things that young pianists often will do. And she encouraged my little composing experiments. Every year at the studio recital, once a year, there would be a composition, a world premiere, by me, and I would just improvise something at the piano because I didn't have the skill sets to write anything down. But those small actions really opened doors for a young mind because they just seemed possible. And so I was surrounded by possibilities in that way. When I was, let's see, the summer before my senior year, yeah, I remember now, the summer before my senior year, so 88, my parents insisted that I do something for my summer instead of just blowing it the way I did the year before, I remember. So I looked in the paper, because the internet wasn't active, looked in the paper and I saw this ad for a music composing program at something called the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, which I had never heard of. And so it was interesting. In some ways I was super cloistered and kind of cut off from music opportunities. I never heard a live orchestra performance at this point. Everything was piano. So I said, that seems fun. I was known as the musical one in the family. And so I would be the one that would go to the piano and make up stuff really quickly. And sometimes I would leave on my solace. I remember instead of putting on headphones, I would go and I would improvise at the piano a little bit, kind of like new agey sounding music, but also trying to replicate the music that I heard in these live concerts in Berkeley and Oakland that we went to, of Peruvian musicians and Bolivian musicians from Ecuador and Chile that were coming during the 70s and 80s to the Bay Area to give concerts. During this time in Latin America, there was a lot of turmoil. There were a lot of dictatorships. There was a lot of people fleeing in and out. You had La Guerra Sucia, the dirty war in Argentina. You had the fallout between Allende and Pinochet in Chile. There was just so much happening. So we in California and New York and some of the more coastal areas were the beneficiaries of restaurants and concerts. So I realize now that as a composer, the biggest influences weren't, like training. It was like all these life things and these exposure to different things. And then kind of an ethical training and working hard, even if it was in Russian or getting straight A's and doing that kind of thing. We musicians, we learn how to work very hard. And so if we do that in another discipline, it can carry over. And I learned that. So I took this summer program, and that's when my life changed, because I walked into this old building on Ortega Street, not the new fancy, really fancy building that it is now, right in the heart of the theater district. The first thing I remember walking into this old building was I just heard piano coming from all directions. I didn't know what a practice room was. And this, building had a bunch of little closets that were the practice rooms. So I just heard like piano, 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 piano from the right, piano from the left, piano upstairs, piano down below. Going, what is this? This is unbelievable. And it was like thrilling to me because one of the things I really loved growing up was, ooh, I get to play a different piano. It was like driving somebody else's car, and it's different, and it's kind of enjoyable to figure out how it feels differently. So I love the different sound and the different things I could do. I just didn't realize that this was a way of life. And then I saw child prodigies, which blew my mind, and it made me feel really behind, like, oh my God, I can't do anything like that. What the, is that even natural? I mean, what is this? And then I remember going into the first classroom, music classroom, and I walked in and I saw a chalkboard, and it had staff lines that were painted onto the chalkboard. I'm like, you mean this is permanent? And I saw a textbook, it was a music theory textbook, and instead of being like horrible chemistry, which I hated, instead of that, it was like music and pictures of composers that I knew in there. And my mind just went, like that. And it was like headlights went on and my future was like just somehow coming lit, like a one-way, like a model one-way, you know, fashion, like this. I said, oh my God, I have no idea what this is gonna do, but my heart, I remember, was beating like this, and I said, this is what I was supposed to do. This is what I was supposed to do. And you have to understand, I never met any professional musicians. I didn't know anybody. I was so behind in so many ways, you know, but I remember keeping my mouth shut for like 24 hours, went back to day 2 and just had my mind blown again. And I went home to my parents the second day and I said, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna be a composer. This is it. This is what I was supposed to do. And so my first lucky break, I like to say that my parents said, go, do this. But if you're gonna do this, you have to go deep. If you're gonna do this. And I said, okay. And I remember that conversation. And that was huge, just to have the validation of 2 people so influential and powerful in my life. And they're still influential and powerful in my life. I mean, I lucked out. I got two good ones from mom and dad. And so I did. And I was sweating bullets trying to learn how to really read and write music because I was really bad at it up to that point. My ear is good, so I was learning things as my piano teacher would sort of play it for me. So I was very lucky. I got into Rice University. And if I would apply today with the couple little pieces that I had written over the last year of high school, if I were to apply with those pieces or that portfolio today, I would not get in. And I just know that the level of the school had risen so much in composition over the years. So I got in and I was playing catch up for a while, but I had just, you know, really amazing 6 years there because I stayed there for 2 degrees. There were challenges. And one of the things that, you know, it's been mentioned, I have a small academy of music now for emerging composers. One of the best things that's been transformative for me to interact with my younger brothers and sisters, my younger siblings in composition, is it's made me look back on my life. It's made on Generation X, it's made, you know, me look back on the experience of coming of age in the 80s and the 90s and then professionally in the early 2000s. And to see it with their eyes. And there was a lot of stuff there that I just accepted that your generation isn't, which I think is awesome because you guys are supposed to go further than me. You're supposed to go further than my generation in terms of social progress and artistic talent and ability and the stories that you want to cultivate and say. But my first day, for instance, at Rice University, I was 17, so I was a bit younger, and I was marveling at, oh my God, I'm actually here. Like I'm actually a music major. It's incredible. And I was meeting other like freshman music majors, and we were all like, yeah, we're here. We're like a secret club. It's my second family. And I was like super excited. It's the best feeling in the world. It really is. And I still work with many of them today. We're all almost 50 years old. We've been growing old together. It is the best thing. And I found a practice room, a really nice one with a Steinway and a view. I mean, the building at Rice is unbelievable. And I put up I was learning Ravel Jadot, which is just kind of flashy, short work, very beautiful. And I was working on this one passage, maybe 5-10 minutes, when the door suddenly just flew open to my practice room. And these were doors that had little windows so you can see inside. And one of the piano faculty just kind of burst in and he started yelling at me. And I was stunned, you know, I was totally intimidated. And he was saying, what are you doing there? Get off that piano. You shouldn't be touching that. Get back to work. And it didn't compute for a moment. And then I realized, oh my God, he thinks I'm one of the cleaning ladies because they're all Mexican. He thinks I'm one of the cleaning staff. And I was horrified. So I was in that mix of pissed off, outraged, embarrassed for him, intimidated, you know, and when all those things hit you at once, you just kind of sit in it for a few seconds. You don't even blink, you're just horrified. And then I stayed calm and I just explained that I was in so-and-so studio. And as soon as he heard me speak, you could see his face kind of crumple. and he was embarrassed. He apologized, but he was angry. It wasn't like a heartfelt apology. He was mad that he had to apologize, kind of like, fine, And I remember thinking, God, if I were a cleaning lady, wouldn't it be amazing if a cleaning lady could play Ravel? Wouldn't that just like change everything, rewire everything you thought about social, economic class and division? And if she was in love with the piano, would that be so horrible? But he made very clear to me who was included and not. And that's how I started my career as a student, was this message of you don't belong. But then I found others that were super awesome. They were very warm and receptive, but it was something I never thought to actively question, the fact that I went into a room and I was going to have to deal with doubters. It was just my default, was I was always going to have to justify, no, affirmative action didn't get me here. I can play, I am good at what I do. And that it was going to take me longer to get the same amount of respect and attention as somebody else who looked like a classical musician. Nowadays, people call these like microaggressions. I used to call them insults. I just call them, just another daily insult. It's just something that I just have to keep going through. So I did my doctorate in Michigan. It was at Michigan that I began to start experimenting with bringing in this music from Peru that I really loved and that I was familiar with the classical. And was always uncomfortable, but it took me years to figure out why I didn't like the explanation of what I did. I didn't like the word, oh, she uses a string quartet to imitate piano pipes. And I was like, I'm not imitating, I'm making something new, but it has roots in all these cultures. And I'd be like, it's like me. I'm not an American imitating a Peruvian. I'm a Peruvian American. That's actually a whole thing. Nobody's imitating anything else. It's an existence. It's something that exists. And it took me years because sometimes in the States, we don't know what to do with people with funky backgrounds. So they're instantly all Black or all Indian. If you say you're Peruvian, you weren't born in the country. I mean, and we're witnessing that turmoil right now in this very election and over the last 4 years, discomfort. The classical music world is really, for the first time in my life, I've been waiting for this for decades. I almost didn't recognize it when it started happening this past spring, is saying, we don't have enough women conductors. We don't have, what's going on here? How come we can't think of a single Black composer to put on? And for a very long time, it's thought of itself as exempt from the normal rules of social progress. And even if you suggested you should play a woman composer or hire a Black conductor, that somehow you were betraying classical music. There was even that kind of implied suggestion. And we need to cry BS on that. We need to say, it is possible to love your European culture, but you expect the classical music conservatory to love you back. And that was something I did not feel very often, that I love Beethoven and Bach, but I expected to love its constituents back. And so it wasn't a relationship of that was reciprocal. And it's finally starting to change. I'm finally seeing real movement on that. And sometimes it's clumsy, like an orchestra just finds the first Black person to say, do you compose? And they just give this person a really big opportunity. And maybe they just need to write a few chamber works before they write in a major symphony. They have to succeed immediately. They're not given the same ladder that somebody else may be given. I mean, we have to look at how to build this pathway. But this is the world that all of you are moving into right now, is we're in the beginning of this reckoning. And that's a great opportunity for all of you. You have an opportunity here to shape it. When you go into the conservatory, play the standards. They're going to teach you a lot. But make room for exploring composers that may not be taught automatically. Like your report card should be only 10% of what you're doing. You should be doing the other 90% that you build yourself and somehow find the time. Or talk with your teachers. Your teachers may allow you to switch in a piece and do something else, but don't go in so dutiful and such a good student. Go in like wanting to own your education. I think it's super important, and it's almost a responsibility of your generation. And you're gonna find people like me that'll be like, go, 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 go deep, go deep, go deep, cheering. We're cheering you, you know, because this means you'll go farther than us. So when I left with my doctor, it was 2001. I had just made my first trip to Peru, which was mind blowing. And I realized, oh my God, I'm so like, I have so much culture shock. I'm sick with culture shock. Because I realized that finally seeing my mother's culture, like in the homeland, wasn't this magical homecoming in which I was going to feel totally accepted and like understand everything. First of all, I couldn't understand Spanish. Right off the bat, I was losing. I just couldn't get the language down. Then I got sick from everything. I got sick from the food and the water. The sun was really hot. I felt rejected by the land. And then all my cousins there were so many of them. It was huge. In my family, it's just me and my brother. That's it. But suddenly I had like 150 people came to the showing. What, the American wing, the weird exotic American wing is coming to Peru. Let's go see what Sabina, my mom, has been doing all these years. And so I was like, you know, meeting all of these people, and they all look kind of like me. They all looked a little bit like me, and it looked like my mother. So it was super disorienting. It was wonderful. And that started a period of about 15 years in which I had been going to Peru a lot. My mother's been with me on every single trip, and my skill sets got better as a composer. And it doesn't stop when you leave school. You know, when you start getting professional work, you continue getting better, and you start working on things you didn't work on in school. School is the tip of the iceberg. You're going to pick up all these other skills, you know, that you're going to need. Some of them are people skills. And I learned people skills of explaining what it means to bring in Peruvian influences into a string quartet or a piano sonata. And I got better at doing that. I remember thinking that because I hated competitions and I refused to do them when I was young. And I wasn't going to Europe like a lot of my peers to study classical music. I was going to Peru to study classical music. And nobody goes to Peru for that. That would mean I would not have a big career. And I was like, are you okay with this? And I said, I think I'm okay with it. I'll be a well-loved teacher somewhere, and I'll encourage people, you know, my students, to find themselves and to be authentic to what their contribution is supposed to be as an artist for the years that they have of life on this planet. And that will be my role. And instead, the opposite happened, which is that I gradually grew this career. It started with writing for my roommate, and started with writing for people that were in my studio and my little piano quartet, just my colleagues in school. And when they started to do well, they could get me a commission. They could get me into a festival. So composers are like a burr or a fuzz that gets stuck in your clothes. And we follow all the performers around into the environments that they go into. So I benefited that I was so active as a pianist. I never picked up any degrees, but I met a lot of performers that way. So I think, you know, as you think about your life, the first thing I can say is, you know, yes, of course, work hard. You already know that. But the second is actively, person by person, build your community. Sometimes you don't even know why you want to get coffee with somebody, but there's just, they picked this one funky composer to put on their junior recital. That's strange. What's going on here? That's kind of cool. That's kind of, yeah, I gotta go. I just need to talk with the person and see what's going on in their brain. Why are they doing this? Do it. And you don't have to unpack it that much. Just kind of find your family. And don't be afraid if you want to do orchestra, but you want to be in a democratic orchestra where you all have a say in the repertoire, for instance. That might be a smaller orchestra. I actually think, you know, Vinay, conductors of your generation are so hip. I've been talking to some conductor collectives, you know, oh my God. And the things that you people want to do, it's so exciting. You know, they want to reshape what it means to be a conductor, and to the pieces you pick tell a story. You're curating a certain kind of philosophy. And the relationship we have with your performers, we're starting to move away from this model of what an orchestra can be. And if you want to play in hospitals. You want to connect with, we used to call them civilians, people that didn't know anything about music. And, you know, they didn't know anything about music. They couldn't tell the difference between a good performance or a bad performance of Beethoven. They, you know, didn't understand why we might play new music, which is really weird and strange. Or they really loved it because it reminded them of cartoon music or horror film music. You know, they had these different kinds of ways of looking at music that it made us feel weird, like I can't relate, or they don't care about this competition that I won. I mean, don't you get it? Like, that's a thing, that's like big. It's really good to put yourself in a room with civilians and to see how your music making holds up. Because ultimately, one of the problems of classical music is we got cloistered, we got cut off. And if one of your litmus tests or something that you feel like you should be doing isn't holding water with the larger society, you should look at it. It's okay to do that to an extent, I think. I do, because it challenges the larger society. But if we're only doing this for ourselves, we're gonna lose our base. We're gonna lose our connection to humanity. And so if you want to do something like volunteer at an African American community center or a refuge community center and teach violin for free, you should do it. It will nurture what is humane in you. And as you get older and you meet more people in the industry, you'll be able to weld that with the street cred that you have in the music industry. You'll be able to say, thank you for making me conductor of this orchestra. I think we need to beef up our engagement wing so that we build a component that will go into the community. And that will be because when you're 18, 19, you used to volunteer. And so that has been what has happened in my life. That college was an amazing time for me to figure out the music world and then figure out why being an ESL tutor for the Mexican maids, the one that piano teacher vilified, was such an important part of my life. It really was. I'm still in touch with 3 of them. They've been following my career grow, you know, over the decade. They're like all proud. A couple of them are grandmothers, you know, and but I think about them a lot. And I think a lot about the Latino guys that I volunteered with when I was in Michigan. I used to volunteer at a men's prison about an hour from Detroit. And these were Latino male prisoners, part of a group called ASTA, Hispanic Americans Striving Towards Achievement. So the more well-behaved prisoners had access to guests that would come in, guest speakers that would talk about politics. And I was the music one. And I was beginning to travel in Peru, so I was telling them about coming to grips with being a multiracial Latino woman. And a lot of them were thinking the same things. But unlike me and my brother, they didn't have the support system of parents. They made bad decisions. Some of them committed horrific crimes I did not feel safe around. But it was important for me to go to these forgotten people that made bad decisions to see the context for my musical journey as well. So I'm very thankful that I was, what had bolstered my career, and Escaramuza that I understand that you'll be working on, and other pieces, has been the fact that I didn't know I was going to do music when I was 5, 6, 7, 8, and that I was open to looking at the world and studying the world. I was surrounded by people thinking this way too. You know, you don't go into this field, any of us, unless you're romantic. You're a deeply romantic person if you go into this. And you think that music is going to make the world better. That's why you go into this field. I have seen the people that win the competitions. I'm going to tell you right now, I have seen them. And they're not happy because the happiness lasts for about a month. And then they're chasing the next one because they don't want to be forgotten. They're always feeling deprived. They're always pining. It's like an opium hit. You're chasing the next high. But if your satisfaction comes from someplace deeper, you'll be able to swing this field because it can be very fickle. It really can. But you need to build your family person by person, get your skill sets, study music outside of the curriculum. And my prediction is that they're going to start changing the curriculum over the coming decade. maybe not in time to have a very strong effect on your immediate career if you're going into college and going to be going through the standard diet, but that some experimentation is going to happen, and that you won't necessarily just go through Baroque, classical, romantic, contemporary, and maybe early music before all of that, this sort of standard diet, that they may conflate some of these and then spend more time on the last 100 years as they should. And my hope is also that conservatories will build in, but if they don't, you should build this into your education, what I call practicums. Basically, performer meets composer, and you create a piece of music and you present it to the world. It's pretty simple. Performer, composer, you create some music and you present it to the world. Now, where it gets complicated is what music? What's the story? The process of working it out. When performer may not have all the skill set they're going to have in 5 years, and composers are terrified to write for tuba or for a trumpet. They don't understand the range, and there's going to have to be this education. But the people that I bring to my school as teachers are people like Chris, who was the first percussionist I ever worked with. He was a little younger than me. I was a doctoral student, and he was an undergrad. So he's my percussion teacher because I learned back then when I was in my 20s. He's a great teacher. He knows how to work with composers. So now he's teaching my students. And he's an incredible percussionist. Gets gigs all over. I still have, back when we were using cassette tapes, and some scholar wants to listen to them and write a paper or something. It's gonna be very weird for me. But I have all these cassette tapes with like Nick Walker, bass, 1993. And in it, it's like 2 hours of recording of him and me in a practice room. And he's like, no, Gabby, wait, listen to this. That's the coolest thing ever, Gabby. You gotta put it in a piece of music. I'm like, okay. And I go put it in a piece of music. And I have hours and hours. It's total nerd, geeky, but it's awesomeness, So your conservatory time needs to be this. Don't let the curriculum be the only thing. You got to promise yourself. It can be so much more joyful and liberating, and you actually honor the curriculum better if you take it places. You weld it to what makes you, you. And if you do that, I think you're going to be irresistible when you start building your life as a professional. I really, really do. I really do. And I do think the industry is going to be changing over the next 10 years to reflect this. So you want to get in shape for that. You want to get in shape for a world that doesn't look like the one that we had pre-pandemic, if that world was already in peril. So start thinking more daring if you haven't yet. If any of this is resonating, that means you've been having some thoughts or some feelings about it. Listen to those. Go there. And I would normalize this feeling by talking with other kindred spirits. Like attracts like. I really think that. If you are having conversations, somebody hears you say something like you really want to play this type of music, they'll ask you out for coffee. You want to kind of exude that kind of curiosity, that kind of energy, that kind of forward thinking into your life. And in spite of how weird and frequently awful this year has been, and for us in California, I'm right in a fire area. We have another big fire warning coming up this weekend. It might be, the winds look really bad, so we're bracing ourselves. I'm ultimately extremely optimistic. I think the possibilities coming out of this can potentially be so wonderful and life-changing, and it's time. It's really, really time. So it's been important for me to, when you guys called me and asked if I would speak with you, as you can see, I'm not shy, and I have a lot of feelings about what we're supposed to do as musicians. And it's really important that you hear this from me, that this is your world, and it is ready. If a world were ever to signal, come in and change things, this is your opportunity, where old ways are dying, new ways need to be formed. This is what it looks like when everything's like in chaos like this. This is it. So stay optimistic, build your family, write your music, be damn good at what you do, like work really hard. If you can be badass at what you do, that's gonna really open more doors and quell doubters. But work on being you. And even if others don't like it, that's okay. That's their right. And you can very politely set that aside. Be very respectful, but classy, and just set it aside. Maybe we should open up for some questions. I've been sort of talking for a while. I don't know.
I have so many, but yeah, I'm gonna open it up to any of the musicians who, this is your chance to ask anything you want to our special guest. Anything?
It looks like
Victoria,
we have
do you
a
question?
Victoria.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Hello. Yeah, I've been really vibing with everything you've said so far, so like that's awesome. I was looking at some pieces you've composed, and you wrote for, I'm a violist, you wrote for solo viola and orchestra. And I excuse my pronunciation, but La Llorona, tone poem for viola and orchestra. It really kind of like piqued my interest, 'cause, like I've heard about the legend, and then also like, oh, there's, wow, like it just since this call started, I was looking around and it just caught my attention. So I just wanted to ask about like, what were like some things you were thinking about when composing that piece?
So if you would have talked to one of my good friends, he really startled me after I wrote it and he went to the premiere. So this was like a kind of a early-ish gig for me. So it was kind of professionally important. It was starting, my career was beginning to move and I needed a few big projects to put me on the map. When I look back on it, there's so many things that I really love about the piece. And one of the things I love is that there were skill sets I didn't have yet, and I hid them very well. You can't, for the most part, I wasn't that comfortable with the orchestra yet. I'm so much a chamber music baby that it was hard for me to jump from the chamber music to the orchestra. And the way I did it was to start with concertis, because then I could focus on the soloist. But the orchestra writing is very shy in some places, like orchestra, viola, 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 and then and it was like a little blips. But I was also terrified at blowing the violas out of the water. I didn't want to, that color, oh my goodness, the color that you guys have on the instrument is like to die for. So I love stories. And so I had a story, that's why the tone poem. And what I did was, this began this lifelong habit of my taking together several stories and kind of conflating it into one. With my dad being a Mark Twain writer, my brother and I, we had extra homework we used to do for him. We had to write short stories for him and write papers, and he would give us a grade, with comments, editorial comments. It was just normal. But now I'm very grateful, sometimes annoying then, but I'm very grateful for it now, because it gave me this ability as a composer is to kind of construct the plot that my music's about. It's like a ballet without dancers, or an opera without singers, So the La Llorona is in 7 movements. And the first movement is called Slumber. And the Llorona is a female spirit that is not at rest. And in Russia, it's the Rusalka. So that's famous from Dvorak's music. And Japan has this type. And in Latin American mythology, it's often a woman that died by suicide or in childbirth or at the hands of a jealous lover. So I was not so interested in that part of the story. I was interested in what happened afterwards when she became the spirit. So in the Slumber, she has just crossed over from life. And I imagine her at this woman spirit, something kind of floating in the air at night in this Andean forest by a river. So it's the riverside, and this big bass clarinet comes in. So it's a really mysterious sound. And that's the anaconda. It's winding this way. I mean, it's the most specific tone poem I've ever written in that way. And you can hear the forest is beginning to waken up. Like as if the moonlight is casting its light, and you start seeing outlines of the leaves and the trees, and you realize where you are. And as the forest wakes up, she's waking up. And it's just the orchestra. And when she wakes up, we're in the second movement. Everything's a tanka. And the second movement is called Awakening. She wakes up, and that's when the viola starts playing. There's this big dramatic entrance. And it's all these tremolos, these difficult chords, and there's a melody. If you bring out that melody at the top, there's natural melody in it, with a lot of these tremolos. And the orchestra answers with these mallets, like marimbas that are very violent sounding in reaction to her. and she's awakening and she sees herself, but she can see through herself. And so her mind is trying to understand what's going on. She thinks she's still in life. So it's this violent opening. And then it goes into the next movement where she doesn't accept it. And we go into flight. That's the third movement. And it's chase music, basically. And the orchestra's chasing her. And she's like trying to symbolically run from her fate. So it shows off the viola in terms of an active instrument that's just constant 16th notes all over the place. And it only ends in the fourth movement when we get to the scene of the chulpa, the danza de la chupa. And the chulpa are mummies in Peru that were bound up in pots and found often on the beach, underneath the sand. So the myth for that is that as these skeletons with cloth kind of wrapped around them stand up, they can't stand up all the way because they're still sort of in that position, and they have a lumbering walk. So there's a dance with the doo-doo-doo-doo, doo-doo, doo-doo-doo-doo, doo-doo, and she's singing through that the whole time. Figures to me that sound like she's crying. And she's going, what is this? I don't get this. What is going on here? And we go into the fifth movement, and it's the most beautiful sounding of the movement, just really lush. You've got this great sound between bass clarinet and piccolo that are playing the same melody together, moving together, but a couple octaves plus a fifth apart. To me, that sounds kind of like a panpipe. When you play a panpipe, you hear the fundamentals and the overtones together. And it's really silvery, and it's really major sound. It's just very, very lush. And that's the moon coming out and saying, look, this is what's happening. And so her moonbeams are touching the Llorona, and the words are spilling down to her, and it's like it's almost like a type of communion where she's these two women, these two female spirits are in communion with one another. And then she says, screw this. And she goes back to the chase music, flight. And that comes back. And then when it dead ends in the last movement, the seventh movement, back at the river. And that opening dark music, it's really rich with harp and low strings, comes back. And she's right back where she began. And it ends with her disappearing into the forest. And the last thing you see are her eyes that are kind of flickering. And those are left-hand pizzicatos that are happening, and it just fade into the harp. You don't know if the harp's doing it or she's doing it. It comes together. So like I say, I'm not usually that specific, but at that time in my life, I needed to be, and it was my friend that pointed out why, a really good friend. So the day after I defended my dissertation, it was such a horrible timing in some ways, I was diagnosed with a really serious disease that came out of the blue, an illness that nearly killed me. And nobody in my family's ever been sick with it. It's just one of the things. I never even knew anybody sick. And because, believe it or not, I was born with a hearing loss, not perfect pitch. So I thought I was like amazing. I'm a partially deaf person, but I'm a musician. So I was a runner. I was really fit. So I always thought I was really physically, strong. And then this just changed my world. And I was in medical assistance and getting operations and radiation every day for a while at a cancer center, a lot of drugs for about 7 years, from my late 20s into my mid 30s. And I lost most of the eyesight in my eye. And I was coming to grips with a new reality. I wasn't getting my body back, and there was a lot of pain issues. And I wrote La Llorona, and my friend said, that's you. That is you, what you did there. The crossover and denying it and the shock that you felt through all of this. I remember when he told me, I don't cry easily, but I remember I said, I remember it just kind of came out. And sometimes friends, they see your soul, even when you're looking somewhere else. You're keeping busy. I'm a professional. I'm writing a big viola concerto for a major conductor. And I think that's why it's so specific, was that I was unpacking at a distance, at like an artistic distance, but this story, and I could have conflated different aspects of the story. I filled in some things with my own imagination. Well, my imagination is rooted in my personal experience. So it's one of my more personal works, I think, in that way, because of everything. Musically, I would be hard pressed. There are a couple spots I can hear Peruvian influences, they're subtle. I would have to point them out. I don't think somebody coming along would necessarily find them. Could be things like in that dance of the chulpa, the do 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 do, that kind of weird dance they're doing is all in fourths, and they're doing it as tonitos. So like, woo, 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 woo. So on string instruments, we can do that. Not so common for horns and others. I would have to explain, don't make separations, don't go hoo, 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 but connect it like a string player. To me, that's a panpipe, because panpipes do that. They do that kind of sound, and they're often in fourths. There are little things like that. But you should play it. You should play it and send me a recording.
Yeah. Awesome. And it also just like relates into like how there's just been a trend of composers like making like emotionally like attached works for viola. I don't know, it's just become a trend I found, so it's awesome. Yeah.
And
Thank
you should be asking composers you meet to write you pieces, solo viola. I mean, viola still doesn't have enough repertoire. I thought that's going to change because all the violists were saying that when I was in school. You know, I was a freshman in 1990. What? We're still saying this? Come on. You know, so now you've got to say, please write me. I'll show you. What'll be very helpful is if you're working on something, even if you can't play it perfectly, like show a composer what you're doing, your fingers, explain to them the different types of bow choices. Where my friends used to just grab me in their practice room and just break down something I was fascinated because I felt like I was getting wisdom, and composers aren't told these things. It's really shocking. In our curriculum, we're not given this wisdom and this intel. Yeah, there's an orchestration class, but it's really pedantic. It's not inspiring at all. And it looks at like 4 orchestra works. It's supposed to tell you everything you need to know. Yeah, I know, it's ridiculous. So we really are dependent on you guys being our teachers and telling us stuff. And you know, one of the things that if you're interested in doing this, especially emerging composers, but sometimes even established composers, some can be very clumsy in how they dialogue. They, you know, there's an etiquette you learn when you're in a string quartet about how to arrive to consensus, and a conductor learns how to do that. You know, it's very, very important, the people skills. Composers have no opportunity to practice that, unlike you guys. They really don't. So sometimes they put their foot in their mouth. And if there's a way for you to educate them in the etiquette, you know, or if they just say, I don't like it, and you're like, well, let's explore some sounds, you know, and then even most of them will realize I shouldn't have said it that way, but it's not what I heard in my head for the last 6 months, you know, and sometimes they're still married to that old sound. I have found if I just lay back and just let it be what it's going to be, that I actually start forgetting, and that what I'm really falling in love with this new thing. It's like when you cook something and say you don't get to taste it along the way. You think it's going to taste a certain way, and then you eat it, and it's like a disconnect. Wait, it tastes saltier or sweeter or whatever than expected. But then you forget, because this is pretty tasty, you know, and it's much more immediate and real. So if you work with composers now while you're in your so-called formative years or whatever you want to say, you will just get the skill sets to take it forward and build repertoire or viola, flute, whatever it is, percussion that you want to do. And I think building repertoire together is the most exciting part of classical music. Yeah.
Gabriela, can I ask, you know, I just did Manche Tiempo at CIM, and you write that that's an homage to Bartók, and this group is working on music for strings, percussion, and celesta. So I think it'd be great if you could just talk about, because I'm also a Bartók nut, how much Bartók has influenced you, and just, you know, how we can connect your music to the Bartók piece we're playing.
I mean, Bartók's my daddy. And I also think he was Latino in a previous life. I do. And talk about essential. You know, he just got to the essential bones. Like no matter what race you are, we all have the skeleton, right? So Bartók's kind of like that. He builds on the skeleton. And I remember, there's a little volume of string quartets put out by Boozy and Hawkes, this red volume. And to me, that's my Bible. And I'll quote from it like scripture. I'll be like 2-2-26. And that's like the second movement of the second string quartet, bar 26. Just go there and you'll find your solution for anything compositional. I'll find his innovation. What I love about Bartók is the physicality of it too. It's not just cerebral candy for composers. It just, what it does in people's hands on an instrument. And I just wish that wind players had as much as the string quartets, and the piece you just talked about for string percussion and celeste is string heavy. I mean, that was his thing, was really strings and piano. So Bartók, I'm sure you all know about his history. He born 81 and died in 1945. And if you look at the backdrop, he lived during very tumultuous times, very dangerous times, historical times. We're in historical times now, with some people likening some of the authoritarian waves to the same backdrop of his life. And he was basically trying to rescue the music of people that were being persecuted, the dirty people of Europe, the peasants, the uneducated. And there's some speculation that he might have been somewhere on the spectrum, Asperger or autism of some sort, which would explain, his complete devotion and obsession with collecting these melodies and how detailed he was with it. He was a bit cool in his personal relationships too. But there was so much there going on underneath the surface. And it's incumbent upon you to convey that kind of mystery that was Bartók, and conviction, tension as well. So you can't be shy. If he says quiet, you got to go really quiet. If he says loud, you got to near the frog and you go loud. If he has 5 different accent marks, you have 5 different sounds for those accent marks. Because remember, he was probably somewhere on the spectrum. So each accent mark, he had a different sound that he had in mind. And in spite of all of that, there's a lot of wiggle room for interpretation in between the notes and the accents. I mean, if you really get into his music, you feel liberated by all the information rather than shackled. And I think Bartók owning it, he wasn't just imitating, he created a third sound that came out of it for going to the blender of his imagination. And it's a little bit like a really incredible sci-fi writer that invents a whole new civilization, a new way, new beings, and gravity works differently. And it's like this whole world. And the first chapter, you're trying to find out what this world, you're getting to know who's the boss and what's their constitution. It's like a whole, and then you're in it. You just get lost, and that's how people become trekkers, and really, they get into the world. And Bartók like that. He can create this world that it's just unmistakable when you're in it. And only a few composers, I think, have been that charismatic. So he sets a very high bar for other composers. And of course, him looking at native music and talking about music as progress of human imagination and culture really speaks to me. And I was looking for models at a certain time with life. Viscerally, I struggled a lot with playing Beethoven sonatas when I was younger. I could do it, but I couldn't own it the way I saw other pianists owning it. And then my teacher gave me the Bartók solo sonata, and I had to memorize in like 3 days. Boom, it just made sense. And in about maybe 2 to 3 weeks, I could play the whole thing. And I never had that experience before. And I was like, this is what I was built for, and it was not easy, but it was native in some way. So that started my long love affair with him from a very creative standpoint. I think theorists have a certain way of loving Bartók, and historians do. Composers and conductors are a little more similar, and players, it's kind of a creative entryway into his music. I'm not so jazzed by, okay, he does the dyads and then the cell sets, and yes, that's there, but that's not what I'm getting excited about. It's all of these other things that really motivate me.
Well, we have time for, there's running out, but if there's a couple more questions, Gabriela, if you wouldn't mind making time, I just want to see if
Absolutely.
Is there anyone?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Betsy. Yeah.
So you mentioned something about micro.
Do you mind? Do you feel comfortable turning on your camera?
Sure.
Yay! Hi.
So you said something about microaggressions when you were talking about your time at conservatory, and how instead of microaggressions you just call them insults. And so, how did you deal with that?
Well, this is a wonderful question. If you leave your camera on, I'll be able to answer better. I just relate to real people better. When I talk about this with my composers, I realized that people my generation, our standards were lower sometimes because there were so few other people of color. We felt like we wouldn't get the support, and it was just the state of being was that we were going to have to sometimes eat it. And I went through this period this past spring. I started getting really angry. I was getting kind of pissed off, going, I ate a lot of crap. I really did. And then I was like, okay, calm down. Look where you are. Look at this career that you have. You're okay with it, But I do remember as a college student, the one Latin American professor at Rice University. She was a sociology professor and brilliant. And she said this one thing at a talk for the Hispanic club that was there. And there were no other music majors in the club, but there were Hispanic students that were of many different majors. So they were good friends of mine. And she was saying, every which way you're different is a way that you're strong. And when you break at a certain point, that's a possibility of making that stronger there. And I remember that beautiful poetic metaphor. It really did help me, was to have something like that. But it wasn't always easy. And I think as a survival mechanism, what I often did was I made sure to put a lot of energy into my close relationships. And I was never a trash talker. I was one of those that would just be quiet, but I would kind of like back out of the room really quietly, get out of that situation I didn't like. And then I would go towards a situation that was better for me. I remember just constantly doing that. And then in that situation, I got badass. Suddenly when I was like put down, not taken seriously, and I would just say, I'd be mad inside, fine, I'm just gonna go do it anyway. And I go over here and I do it anyway. I put together my group and nobody's watching me because they don't think I'm much of anything. And then it's better than anything else that happened with any other group or any other student. That was my way of dealing with it. And sometimes to my detriment, I worked extremely hard. Sometimes I didn't take care of myself physically and emotionally. And I think there's more awareness now about emotional health, getting sleep. I would also add to that, just even today, just sit and say, who's in my life that I really feel good around? Who's in my life that I think I would, but I haven't, for whatever reason, had the time to develop a friendship, or just open that door, let it develop naturally. Just even in Zoom, you can do it. You can just say you want to get coffee and just say, let's just talk, and I'll have my cup over here and you have your cup over there, and talk. But be very proactive about this, my generation also. So I've been focusing like on race more, in this discussion, but there was a lot of crap happening around the Me Too, all that nonsense. And one of the reasons why there's been so much turnover in the classical music world is that the people speaking out are women like me in our 40s and some in our 50s that are fed up, because we have to make sure not to wear a revealing top and to pass along tips to one another. Okay, don't be alone with that person. Don't be alone. We inform one another. Remember this, really. And then we find out years later that guy's still at it, but there's nothing he can do to us now. There is nothing he can do to my career. In fact, I can do more. And we started speaking out. So you saw major violin teachers like Prusel, the woman that took him out, Zeniba Bowers. I got one of my Grammy nominations with her. And then you have somebody like Lara St. John, and she's talking about what happened at Curtis, and she and I are colleagues and peers. And Stephen Ships over at University of Michigan, I was involved in that too. I wasn't one of the victims, but we talked with the lawyers, and my roommate knew the victims. So you can see this is like really personal. And so I don't have a great answer for you, except excellence is always a really good thing. If you can like answer it with your own artistic integrity and excellence, it's even more reason for you to take yourself seriously. Don't doubt yourself, you know, and build your family. Very important. Find your family that's going to be people you can talk to so you don't feel crazy. You don't feel alone. You don't feel weak. You feel right. This is not good what's going on, you know, like this. There are more and more resources that I've been looking at. I don't get too many of these microaggressions now because I've gotten to this point. I do. And some of those microaggressions at that higher level can be really annoying. But there are more and more resources now, even if it's just an article, about making your choice if you're going to confront that person in the moment or not. You kind of have to make the judgment call when things like that happen. So I'm sorry this is such a vague answer, but you're probably not wrong for feeling like somebody cast some shade on you, honestly. And it's going to be more about your strategy that's preventive, like a support system. And it's a process, it really is. The last thing I would say to you and anybody else feeling any kind of disrespect about any aspect of your humanity is don't let them take away your joy. There's a way to be fierce without being bitter. Once you get bitter, they are beginning to win. You're romantic, remember? You're in the arts. So you've got to not let them steal that from you because then they've won. So, but if you try and find your way where you can fight and you can be fierce about it, but you're not bitter. And that can take a while. So it's a wonderful question. And thank you for trusting me, you know, with it. I appreciate it.
We've gone over, but if there's any other last question. Oh, Susan, did you have a follow-up? No? Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it wasn't vague at all. So, yeah.
Anya, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do actually. Hi, it's nice to meet you. I play the cello, and a couple years ago, I actually played Adagio para Amantani. I'm not really sure how to pronounce it.
Yeah.
I'm actually also doing it for my college auditions this year.
That is hard. That's a hard piece. She's got killer skills if she's doing that, you know? You need a really good pianist as well. That's hard.
But I was just wondering a little bit about the inspiration behind it and what was going on in your life at that time, I guess.
So Adagio para is Amantani with an accent at the end. Yeah, Amantani. Amantani is an island in the lake between Peru and Bolivia. There's this incredible freshwater lake. I think it's the highest lake in the world in terms of like the altitude. I can't remember, but it's up there. And first of all, when I would go there, it's like being on Mars because batteries stop working and suntan lotion comes out in chunks. You know, like stuff doesn't work the way they're supposed to. So you feel like you're in another land. Water boils differently, like it comes to life. And then even over the same heat, it just goes flat and it comes to, it's like weird, you know? And so right away with that opening low D flat and then the F in the piano and then the repeated notes with lots of pedal, it should feel otherworldly. So if you can think about setting a color and just sitting there and you're just the embodiment of this huge lake with its own laws of nature, there's kind of a vastness. So I would not like rush it. I would, you know, and then you got these weird ninths and oscillating ninths. I would make them really strange and grow big. I would make those phrases really open. And I mean, you're really painting this world. And your audience, and then the phrases build one after another, between the repeated, and then it's not you, it's the pianist that comes to life and has this immediate huge piano cadenza, like this big solo. So it should be unexpected, and ask your pianist, that needs to be a huge cadenza, because when it comes down so suddenly to the A major chord and you come in, it's the best opening. It's going to set you up. You need that kind of grant. It's like you stepping into the valley that is just huge and you're surrounded by the mountains. So if you can think of this vastness, then the dissonance is really important. The subitos, when you go loud and then you go right to the soft, it should be like your breath was taken away. And so as much as possible, if you can make it a continuous sound and a really clean switch, it's not easy. You're physically, you've got to be right there. If you're nervous, you might be like a little loose if you're not as contained physically. So I would breathe before, if you're auditioning with this, wow. Now here's another tip for you. Not a lot of people's going to know this piece. And so you have that comfort and you're going to be presenting this work. That's badass. In your audition, you're saying, I like new music. I like non-Western cultures. I'm painting you a story. I'm a storyteller. That's pretty badass. So I would present it in that spirit. And that is it. You have big hands, or are you taking the OSHA? What are you doing?
I actually do have big hands, yeah.
Oh man, so yeah, I'm excited that you're doing it. You're probably the youngest person I know doing it. That's really amazing. Yeah, does that help? I mean, it's probably just an imagination kind of thing. Now, Amantani also, the island itself, it's very barren, very poor. And yet there are these things of beauty that are on it. Out of like the sandy soil, suddenly you have this brilliant red flower that will come out, just surviving in spite of it. So if you can have these striking colors in the middle of all the dissonance, suddenly you have this A major coming out. If you can really make these contrasts very, very clear, I think you'll really capture the spirit.
Yeah.
And the ending, and the ending should just break your heart. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Maybe we have time for one more. I saw Anna. Did you have a question? No, I'm sorry. Maybe Gabriel, maybe we can finish if you know, we've been working on Escaramuza for a couple months, maybe like a month and a half now, but maybe, you know, we haven't met in person yet, but maybe just your thoughts about what we should have in mind as we approach this piece and approach putting it together, hopefully very soon.
Well, I mean, the percussion opening is actually inspired by taiko drumming. Who's the percussionist? Who's playing it?
I am.
Okay, so go and look at some taiko drumming videos on YouTube. And at the time I was writing it, I was taking taiko drumming in the Bay Area, and it was so much fun. I miss it so much. I even own a taiko drum. I went and spent a lot of money and got one. And so you want that really big sound. And a lot of the gestures, you may even recognize some of the rhythm, da-dum, 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 that kind of thing. And what they'll do is go da-dum, and one arm will come up, da-dum, da-dum. There's a lot of this. And then when they strike, they're trying to hit the floor. It's as if they're penetrating the drum to hit the floor. And so it's very martial arty in that way. So if you can really think about that, it is total power. And it needs to be so recognizable that when you take us out at the end, people are like instantly there within about a second. They know exactly what's happening. And they're not sure if you're going to take us out strong, but no, you're going to like fade away. It's magical. So I would, as much as possible, almost memorize it. So you can just be in your body when you do it, you know, and practice it like a solo. And then you have some help. You have help with others. But if it's possible for your conductor to almost treat this like a concerto, where you don't have to worry too much about lining up. I mean, don't make it difficult, like stay on the rhythm, but you're gonna have help in these Bartok pizzas, and that sound very pizzicato-like, very percussion-like. It's as if what you did is bleeding through the stage in front of you, like all the strings have become percussion instruments too. It's like a ripple effect.
Yeah.
So it's all about power, your power here. and you're setting up the escaramuza. We don't know what's going to come out of this. So the first thing that comes out are these low strings. I would attack it. So if you have shy low strings coming out of this big solo that John's going to give us now, it doesn't work. It's like the energy goes down. So you got to really attack it. And then it builds until you get this da 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 da, and you have the melody da 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 da, and I would vib like crazy. Now this melody, I have noticed that sometimes it gets swallowed up a little bit because everybody's got so much adrenaline going after the big solo, you're in performance, and I didn't give that melody all the power that it has when it comes back at the end because I wanted to leave room to grow. So you're gonna have to play out even more. And one of the ways to play out is not just with volume, I think bibs also catches the attention of the audience, you know? So if you can do that, if you can visually, whoever's playing that opening line, if you can lean forward or have some of it memorized, so you're just all watching the conductor, it does something psychological to the audience. There's like this feeder that's happening. So think about that. Don't just hit the rhythm and everything else, but really play that melody, make it super recognizable so that when it comes back at the end, it's like, oh, God, I've been waiting for it. You want that. There's this real cyclical kind of journey. The hardest part, I think, is this middle section where things seem to kind of fall apart. And often the little gestures are broken up. So if a gesture is da ba ba bum, one group has the lowest one, another group has the second ba, another group has the third ba, and another group has the last one. And it can sound really janky. So the way to knit that together to make it seem like one person or one gesture is to sing everybody else's line. Sing to yourself. Ba, 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 ba. You got to sing the whole thing. That's actually very taiko, where you have like a row of 12 drummers and we go pop, 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 pop down the line. And I know I'm number 7. And it's because I'm just singing everybody's line and it is tight. So that's really important. Otherwise the middle section doesn't work that well. It's the most difficult part. You don't have like this instant groove to glom onto. And you can think of that, like, why is the groove is awesome. Why would she like get away from it and get to this weird kind of disconnected section? And to me, that's like you're taking a walk and you're in this valley and it's really beautiful and kind of intimidating with these rocky Andean cavernous mountains around you. When you get to this one part and you're just watching the boulders fall off, these gestures, you know, of the rocks falling, and it's not connected to anything. So it seems a little random. You want that. And then you're going to come out of it. You're going to go back to the rhythm. And then John's going to take us out on the percussion. So it should be about power. It's war music. That's what it is. I don't like very much war music. This might be the only one I've done. And it should be thrilling. Your heart and your adrenaline should be going. If it's not, then I think you did a disservice to yourself, not to me, to yourself. Because if you let your heart beat and the adrenaline go, it is fun. It should be fun when you do this.
I love how relentless it is. You know, even your fermatas are poco fermatas. I think that's so fantastic. You know, there's that energy that's consistent, that's really gripping, I think, about this piece. So, well, we've gone over, but I am so grateful, and we are so grateful, Gabriela, that you joined us. This was unbelievable. So much truth and optimism that you brought to us this afternoon. So we are really thankful, and we cannot wait to perform your piece in the next calendar year. So just thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, if you can give me the date, I will go. If I don't have a conflict, and I will be there. I'll hear all of you play. I'd love to hear you play.
We will let you know for sure. And yeah, we're so excited to put this piece together and to have you with us. So just we're so grateful that you made time for us today.
Well, thank you. Good luck, everybody. Go deep.
Thank you. Be well. Take care.